When did your past relationship threaten your fresh start? There was a moment, just before the email hit send, when my finger hovered over the trackpad, a cold dread twisting in my gut. It was an application to the university's graduate program, a lifeline I'd been clinging to for months, but the dilemma wasn't about my qualifications or even the daunting academic load. No, it was about the person I knew I'd inevitably encounter there, a ghost from my past who had a knack for showing up right when I thought I was finally turning a new page. My therapist, bless her patient soul, would call this a classic Julie Lewis 30F moment, finding a way to complicate the simple act of pursuing my own happiness, an unfortunate side effect of being a recovering perfectionist. I took a deep breath, the stale air of my cramped apartment doing little to calm my racing heart. Starting over, they called it a fresh slate. For me, it felt more like trying to erase a mural with a tiny art gum eraser. My life had been meticulously painted, stroke by stroke, until a single, brutal brushstroke of relationship breakdown had splattered across the entire canvas, leaving an ugly, irreparable stain. My 5-year relationship with Mark had ended with the sickening crunch of infidelity, not some dramatic explosion, but a quiet, insidious erosion that left me feeling hollowed out, like a house abandoned to the elements. I'd apologized, of course, a pathetic, mumbled string of excuses, but the damage was done. And the worst part? He was the one who had encouraged me to apply to this very university. It was his alma mater, his legacy, as he'd so pompously put it. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was Bruce Alexander, 64M, my older brother, whose protectiveness had only intensified since the Mark debacle. Practically moved into my living room for a week after the breakup, armed with takeout menus and an encyclopedic knowledge of cheesy action movies, convinced I'd waste away without his intervention. He meant well always. Sometimes, though, his well-meaning felt like a lead blanket. "Did you send it?" he demanded, his voice gruff but tinged with concern. "The application, Julie? Don't tell me you're second-guessing again." "I'm on it, Bruce," I sighed, running a hand through my already messy hair. "Just thinking is overrated. Action, that's what you need. Get back on that horse, sis. You're too smart to be selling organic kale smoothies for the rest of your life." He wasn't wrong. My brief post-breakup stint as a wellness advocate at a health food store had been less about embracing holistic living and more about avoiding any real responsibility. Thought of stepping back into academia, into a demanding graduate program, felt like strapping on a pair of ankle weights and trying to run a marathon. But it was better than the alternative. "I'm sending it now," I told him, trying to inject some confidence into my voice. "It's done." A pause. "Good, that's my girl. Now remember what we talked about, new focus. No distractions. You're going there for you, not for anyone else." The unspoken Mark hung in the air, thick and heavy. "I know, Bruce," I mumbled, already regretting telling him the application was sent when it wasn't quite yet. The university campus was a sprawling, ivy-clad behemoth, a stark contrast to the sterile office buildings where I'd spent the last decade of my life. Walking across the manicured lawns on orientation day, I felt like an imposter, a 30-year-old woman surrounded by fresh-faced undergraduates who looked barely out of high school. My stomach did flip-flops as I headed for the humanities building, the weight of expectations, my own, Bruce's, even Mark's lingering ghost pressing down on me. My first real obstacle, surprisingly, wasn't a challenging professor or a mountain of reading. It was Jennifer King, 63F. I spotted her in the common room, a vibrant splash of color against the muted academic tones, holding court with a group of wide-eyed first-year students. Jennifer, who had been my mother's competitive friend since before I was born, had somehow managed to reinvent herself as a wildly popular philosophy professor. She had always been the type to turn everything into a subtle or not-so-subtle contest. Who had the better garden? Whose child got into a more prestigious preschool? Now, it seemed, the competition had extended to intellectual pursuits. Our eyes met across the room, and her smile, initially warm, tightened just a fraction. "Julie Lewis?" she exclaimed, her voice carrying a little too well. "My goodness, what brings you to these hallowed halls? Last I heard, you were conquering the corporate ladder or some such thing." Her tone was perfectly pleasant, but the underlying jab was clear. She knew about my corporate exodus, my relationship implosion. She always knew everything. "Professor King," I replied, forcing a smile. "I decided to pursue my true passion, a graduate degree in literature." "Literature, how charming," she purred, her eyes scanning me, assessing, judging. "Such a romantic field. Well, I wish you all the best. It's a demanding program, especially for those who have been out of the academic loop for a while. One must be truly dedicated, wouldn't you agree?" It wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. And just like that, the competitive dynamic I'd hoped to leave behind with my past life had followed me straight onto campus. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, a need to prove myself, which I'd spent years trying to shed. This was exactly why I was a recovering perfectionist. My first few weeks were a blur of lectures, late-night library sessions, and copious amounts of caffeine. I threw myself into my studies with a singular focus, hoping to drown out the lingering echoes of Mark and the growing shadow of Jennifer's subtle condescension. Avoided the student union, the main quad, any place where I might run into him. The university was huge, I could do this. I could be invisible. Then came the student mentorship program. It was highly encouraged for graduate students to volunteer, and in my misguided attempt to embrace the full university experience, something Bruce had annoyingly suggested, I signed up. My assignmentee was Janice Sullivan, 25F, a senior majoring in creative writing. And I saw her name on the roster, my blood ran cold. Janice Sullivan. My childhood rival. Not a casual rival, mind you, but the kind who'd always been just a step ahead or annoyingly parallel in every single thing. Elementary school science fairs, middle school debate club, high school valedictorian race, she won by 0.001 GPA points, a fact her mother had delighted in sharing with mine. Wed lost touch after college, a blessed reprieve, or so Id thought. Here she was, sitting across from me in a cramped coffee shop on campus, her bright, enthusiastic smile just as I remembered it, though her hair was now an edgy, vibrant purple. My stomach clenched. This wasn't starting over, this was a cruel cosmic joke. Julie, wow, it's really you, she exclaimed, her eyes wide. I mean, I saw the name on the mentorship list, but I figured it had to be someone else. What are you doing here? I managed a strained smile. Graduate school, literature. What about you, Janice? Still writing those dark, brooding poems about angst and existential dread? Her laugh was bright and genuine, and for a split second, I almost forgot our history. Something like that. My thesis is a collection of short stories, actually. Very exciting. And you, grad school, that's amazing. I always thought you'd end up running a Fortune 500 company or something equally impressive. Subtext of not running a Fortune 500 company, but a mere grad student wasn't lost on me, but I tried to push it aside. Janice at least seemed less overtly competitive than Jennifer, but her very presence stirred up an old, ingrained defensiveness in me. I found myself subtly, unconsciously, trying to prove my worth to her, even as I mentored her. It was exhausting. The campus, once a symbol of my new beginning, was rapidly becoming a minefield of past associations. Every corner held the potential for an uncomfortable encounter. The pressure mounted, not just from my studies, but from the intricate web of personal relationships I found myself ensnared in. I was trying so hard to rebuild, but it felt like the foundations were constantly being undermined. My phone screen lit up with a text from Mark. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since the last terse conversation about splitting the remaining bills. Almost didn't open it, but my finger, disobedient, slid across the screen. Hey, heard you started at the grad program. That's great, hope you're settling in okay. It was innocuous, almost friendly. Too friendly. My breath hitched. He knew I was here. Of course he knew. This was his asterisk university, and suddenly the large, sprawling campus felt suffocatingly small. I stared at the text, my thumb hovering over the reply button, 1,000 conflicting emotions swirling inside me. Did I ignore it? Be polite? Tell him to stay away? I felt a wave of nausea. This was the exact scenario Bruce had warned me about, the distraction I desperately needed to avoid. My mind raced, trying to formulate the perfect, non-committal yet firm response, a response that would set a boundary without being melodramatic, a perfectly crafted sentence that would perfectly convey my perfectly controlled emotions. My old perfectionist habits were roaring back to life, seizing control. This was going to be so much harder than I thought. My thumb hovered over the reply button, a battlefield of conflicting impulses raging within me. Ignore it? No, that felt passive, like allowing him to have the last word by not responding at all. Respond with a cutting retort? Tempting, but it would only feed the drama, confirming his continued relevance in my emotional landscape. Bruce's words echoed in my head. New focus, no distractions. You're going there for you, not for anyone else. How to maintain focus when the past was literally texting me? My perfectionist brain, a master of overthinking, began to construct the ideal response. Brief, polite, firm, impenetrable. Something that acknowledged his presence without inviting it. Something that clearly delineated the new boundary without being overtly hostile. The perfect sentence. The perfect, unassailable sentence. My fingers, guided by an autopilot of self-preservation, began to type. Thanks, Mark. Settling in. Busy with studies? Short, concise. No invitation for follow-up questions. No emotional vulnerabilities exposed. I hit send, a shaky exhalation escaping my lips. The digital message disappeared into the ether, leaving behind a lingering unease that no perfectly crafted sentence could dispel. I felt a fleeting sense of victory, a small, controlled step in a world that suddenly felt very out of control. But the calm was superficial. I knew with a sinking certainty that this was far from over. 2 weeks later, the illusion of control shattered like cheap glass. I was leaving my advanced literary theory seminar, my head buzzing with Derrida and Foucault, when I almost collided with him outside the lecture hall. Mark. He was older, of course, the lines around his eyes a little deeper, but the same confident smirk played on his lips. My heart performed an unwelcome jolt, a physical betrayal. Julie, he said, his voice a low, familiar rumble that used to soothe me, now only grated. Thought it was you, my old stomping grounds, huh? Didn't think you'd actually go through with it. My carefully constructed composure faltered. It's a good program, Mark, and yes, I went through with it. I clutched my books tighter, a flimsy shield. He leaned against the brick wall, casually like he owned the place. So, how are things, really? The question was loaded, presumptuous. Wanted to know about my misery, about how much I still pine for him. He wanted to feel important. Things are fine, Mark, busy, focused on my studies. My voice was flat, my eyes unwavering. I would not give him the satisfaction. He pushed off the wall, stepping closer, and I instinctively took a half step back. Look, Julie, about everything. I really am sorry, I made a mistake, a huge one. His eyes, once so alluring, now seemed just tired. I think about it a lot, us. We had. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. What we had Mark, was a meticulously built life you systematically dismantled with your casual infidelity. Don't try to romanticize it now. The words, sharp and unbidden, surprised even me. My carefully constructed, perfect response had dissolved under the pressure of his presence. This wasn't perfectionism. This was raw pain. Its expression hardened just for a moment, then softened back into practiced contrition. I know, and I hate myself for it. I wanted to make sure you were okay, and maybe see if there was any way to fix things. There's nothing to fix, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts to keep it even. It's broken, Mark, beyond repair. I'm here to build something new, not salvage the wreckage of the old. I felt a strange surge of power, a defiant strength. This was me speaking, not the recovering perfectionist trying to control every syllable, but the woman who was tired of being diminished. And honestly, your presence here is a distraction I don't need. He looked genuinely surprised, almost hurt. Distraction? I'm just trying to be civil. Civility from you, I retorted, is often a prelude to something I'd rather avoid. Just "Leave me alone, Mark, please. I need to focus on my future, one that doesn't involve you." I turned abruptly, leaving him standing there, his apology hanging in the air like a stale cloud. My heart was still pounding, but beneath the fear and anger there was a flicker of something new, a sense of boundaries drawn, of agency reclaimed. The perfectionist in me might have stumbled, but the woman beneath was starting to stand firm. I walked away, feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration, a small victory in a battle I hadn't realized I was still fighting. A month had passed since my uncomfortable encounter with Mark. He had, to his credit, kept his distance, though I occasionally saw him across campus, a fleeting shadow that no longer held the power to derail my entire day. The academic demands were relentless, but I found a rhythm, an almost meditative focus in the late-night library sessions. It was during one of these sessions that I stumbled upon Jennifer King, hunched over a collection of ancient texts, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Looked tired, human even. "Professor King?" I ventured, my voice softer than usual. She looked up, her eyes blinking in surprise. "Julie, still burning the midnight oil, I see. Dedication is admirable, my dear, though perhaps even for a literature student there comes a point of diminishing returns." Her words, as always, carried a subtle barb, a suggestion that my efforts were perhaps excessive or misdirected. "Just trying to keep up," I said, a familiar defensiveness rising. She sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. "This program is designed to challenge, not to break, Julie. Don't lose sight of the joy in the pursuit. It's not a competition despite what some might believe." Her gaze flickered to me, a hint of something weary in her eyes. "My mother always told me, Jennifer, life is a race, and if you're not first, you're last. It's a hard lesson to unlearn." I blinked. This was unexpected, a crack in the competitive facade. "My mother used to say something similar," I admitted, a shared vulnerability hanging in the air. "Always pushed me to be the best. Valedictorian, the top of my class, the corporate star." Jennifer gave a wry chuckle. "Ah, the children of high achievers. A special kind of burden, isn't it? My own daughter, bless her heart, rebelled by becoming a performance artist. Says she hates competition. Can't say I blame her." She paused, then looked directly at me, her usual sharp gaze softening. "I recognize that drive in you, Julie. That need to excel. It's a powerful force, but it can also be an isolating one. Sometimes, the greatest achievement is simply finding peace with what is, rather than constantly striving for what could be." Her words hung in the air, a revelation. It wasn't about me specifically. It was about her own ingrained competitive nature, a legacy she was perhaps trying to grapple with herself. My perception of her shifted from a formidable rival to a woman wrestling with her own demons, much like me. The tightness in my chest, the need to prove myself, eased slightly. It wasn't a challenge, it was a mirror. A few days later, during one of our regular mentorship meetings, Janice arrived looking utterly deflated. Her usual vibrant purple hair seemed to droop. "It's my thesis," she mumbled, pushing a half-eaten scone across the table. "My advisor says my stories lack emotional depth. Says they're technically proficient, but they don't feel anything. And honestly, he's right, I'm just going through the motions." I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time without the lens of our childhood rivalry. She seemed genuinely lost, not just struggling, but disillusioned. "What do you mean, going through the motions?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She shrugged. "I just write what I think he wants to see. What I think will get me an A, what I think sounds impressive. I used to love writing, Julie. It used to be this, release. But now it just feels like another hoop to jump through. Another thing to be the best at, or at least good enough not to fail." Her eyes, usually so bright, were clouded with a sadness I recognized all too well. It hit me then, a sudden, blinding flash of self-recognition. Her words were a chilling echo of my own experience, not just with Mark, but with my entire perfectionist approach to life. I had spent so long striving for the perfect outcome, the perfect grade, the perfect career, the perfect relationship, that I had lost sight of the inherent joy, the authentic connection, the real asterisk feeling asterisk beneath it all. I had been so focused on proving my worth that I had forgotten to simply asterisk be asterisk. And Janice, my childhood rival, was mirroring my own struggle back to me. "Janice," I began, my voice soft, "what if? What if you stopped trying to be good enough for your advisor or for anyone else? What if you just wrote what you felt? What if you let go of the pressure to be perfect?" She looked up, a flicker of hope mixed with skepticism. "But that's terrifying. What if it's not good enough? What if it's messy? What if it fails? What if it's real?" I countered, a genuine smile forming. "Sometimes the most profound things come from the mess, from the risk of not being perfect." I found myself telling her about Mark, not in detail, but about the overwhelming need I'd had to maintain the facade of a perfect life, even as it crumbled around me. I spoke about the corporate exodus, the health food store, the feeling of being hollowed out. And then, surprisingly, I shared about my own recent revelation regarding Jennifer, about seeing past the competition and recognizing the shared struggle. Janice listened, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding. "Oh," she said finally, "so it's not just me." "No, Janice," I replied, a genuine connection forming between us that had nothing to do with competition. "It's definitely not just you. Maybe we've both been trying to win a race that doesn't exist." Over the next few weeks, Janice and I started meeting more often, our mentorship evolving into a true friendship. She started experimenting with her writing, allowing herself to be vulnerable, to embrace the mess. As she did, her stories began to come alive. I, in turn, found myself applying the same lessons to my own studies and life. I still aimed for excellence, but the white-knuckled grip of perfectionism began to loosen. I allowed myself to make mistakes, to ask for help, to admit when I was struggling, something my old self would have considered a catastrophic failure. One crisp autumn afternoon, Bruce called. "How are things, kiddo? Still buried in books? No more Mark sightings, I trust." "Things are good, Bruce," I said, smiling as I walked across the quad, a sense of lightness in my step. "Mark's been keeping his distance. And actually, I'm learning a lot, not just from my classes." I told him about Jennifer, about our conversation in the library, and about Janice and the surprising connection we'd forged. I even admitted to him the ongoing struggle with my own perfectionism, but with a new sense of acceptance rather than shame. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sounds like you're really doing it, Julie, starting over, and not just with the books, with yourself. His voice was gruff, but I could hear the pride and relief in it. Good, that's my girl. Just remember to eat something other than kale smoothies. I laughed. I will, Bruce, I promise. My relationship with Jennifer continued to evolve. I started having informal chats in the faculty lounge, often about the challenges of academia, but also about life. She even recommended some literature that wasn't directly related to my course, but which she thought I might enjoy, a gesture that felt less like a challenge and more like a genuine act of mentorship. One day, she confessed that her competitive drive stemmed from deep-seated insecurities about her own intellect, always feeling like she had to prove herself in a male-dominated field. I shared my own struggle with feeling inadequate after the breakdown of my relationship, the pressure to prove I was still enough. We found common ground in our shared vulnerabilities, two recovering perfectionists finding solace in understanding rather than judgment. The biggest shift, however, came with Janice. Her thesis, once a sterile academic exercise, had blossomed into a collection of raw, powerful short stories that moved her advisor to tears. Even won a university-wide literary prize, a significant achievement for an undergraduate. When she told me, her eyes shining, I felt no flicker of the old competitive envy, only genuine joy for her and a deep sense of satisfaction that I had played a small part in helping her find her authentic voice. I couldn't have done it without you, Julie, she said, hugging me tightly. You helped me realize it wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real. You did the work, Janice, I told her. You took the risk. We both did, she corrected, a knowing smile on her face. My own graduate studies continued to be challenging, but I approached them with a different mindset. I learned to distinguish between healthy ambition and the suffocating grip of perfectionism. I accepted that some assignments would be good, not perfect, and that was okay. I sought collaboration rather than trying to shoulder every burden myself. I even joined a student book club, something the old, insular Julie would have scoffed at, and found genuine camaraderie. One particularly rainy afternoon, curled up with a book in my apartment, I received another text. It wasn't Mark. It was Bruce, just thinking of you. Proud of you, kiddo. You really are starting over. I smiled. He was right. The canvas of my life was no longer splattered with an irreparable stain. It was still a work in progress, perhaps messier than I once would have tolerated, but it was being painted with a new palette, richer colors, and a more authentic hand. The road hadn't been easy, and it certainly wasn't perfectly smooth. There were still lingering insecurities, still moments when the ghost of Mark or the echo of Jennifer's old competitive jabs tried to resurface. My perfectionism wasn't cured, merely managed, a quiet hum beneath the surface rather than a roaring torrent. But I had found compromise, with my past, with my perceived rivals, and most importantly, with myself. Starting over wasn't about erasing. It was about repainting, brushstroke by courageous brushstroke, accepting that beauty could exist in the imperfections, and that true strength lay not in flawless execution, but in the willingness to try again, authentically and imperfectly. The university campus, once a minefield, now felt like a home, a place of growth, not just academic, but personal. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, unapologetically okay.